Okay, everyone, we're just going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for showing up today for my first podcast of many, hopefully. But today is the first one, and the topic for today is going to be guardianship abuse. And I do have Dr. Sam Sugar here with us today, the founder of AAAPG, and he's going to talk with us today about guardianship abuse. I want to put out a disclaimer first that the views and opinions expressed on today's podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other group or entity. Dr. Sugar, let me give a little bio about Dr. Sugar. He is a board certified specialist in internal medicine and founder of and president of Americans Against Abusive Probate Guardianship, an organization designed to help expose the systematic corruption of this nation's guardianship systems. Dr. Sugar received his MD from the Abraham Lincoln College of Medicine at the University of Illinois in Chicago. He received certification as a specialist in internal medicine from the American Board of Internal Medicine and is distinguished as a fellow of the American College of Physicians. Dr. Sugar has a book that was released in 2018. That book is titled Guardianships and the Elderly, The Perfect Crime. And it's an Amazon #1 new release. And it sheds light on the complex, opaque system, which all too often enables those in the know to commit the perfect crime. Dr. Sugar writes frequently at http://www.aapg.net and is a certified Florida probate court examiner. He's also a native Chicagonian, and Dr. Sugar now lives in Hollywood, Florida with his wife, Judy. And I'd like to present to you all today, Dr. Sugar. He's rejoining us, you all. Thank you for your patience. Here he is.
I'm back. We had a little lightning strike here in
Oh
the
my
priest,
gosh.
so pardon me for the interruption.
That is quite all right.
Yeah.
Well, I did go ahead and give your a brief introduction for yourself, Dr. Sugar, but is there anything else that you can tell us about yourself? How did you get started?
Well, a lot of people assume that I'm a lawyer because I'm always talking about stuff that's going on. Of course, I'm not. I'm a board certified specialist in internal medicine. I'm primarily retired from medicine, but for the last 10 to 12 years, on the basis of a personal awful experience in the guardianship system, I promised my wife that I would not rest until I let the world know what happened to us. Little did I know at that time that it's not just us. This is a very, very common problem. It is a horrible issue, and everybody in this country is at risk, whether you're rich or poor, black or white, young or old. And I founded AAAPG, the website. I wrote the book, Guardianships and the Elderly, The Perfect Crime. We have a newsletter, and we've spawned other chapters of AAAPG outside of Florida in states like Michigan and Ohio, and spawned other advocates over the last decade who are equally interested in changing the way the system works, but most importantly, in educating people about the risks that they might possibly occur from the guardianship system, which is a system that is supposed to give help to people in need and families in need, but instead, in many cases, far too many cases, it's a story about money and how people can take it from you. You made a little disclaimer at the beginning that I heard before I got cut off. I'll make a disclaimer here too, and that is not all guardianships are terrible. In fact, the majority of guardianships work the way they're supposed to, meaning they're beneficent, they're helpful, they're honest, and they're legit. But a small minority, probably in the area of 10% of guardianships varying from state to state around the country, turn out to be abusive and corrupt, and they follow what I refer to as the guardianship playbook. And to sum that playbook up in a few words, it's litigate, medicate, take the estate, cremate. That's how this system works. And we can go on into the details of how this takes place in the country and why it happens. I should say, though, that in order to adequately explain the guardianship system, or some people call it the racket, takes much more than an hour. And I'll try to hit some of the highlights tonight. But my purpose in doing this podcast and others like it is to raise the awareness of the people about the rabbit hole that exists when an elderly person, usually an elderly person or a person with disabilities, falls into the rabbit hole of needing help or maybe needing help from a government entity. It's not simple, it's not easy, and oftentimes it turns out disastrously.
That is completely correct, Dr. Sugar. I do have a question for you, and I know you kind of touch on this a little bit. Um, what about the history of guardianships? What is a guardianship, and why was it originally created?
That's a very insightful question. I'll try to do that in a rapid fashion. Guardianship is a concept that arose in 16th century England under the guise of something called parens patriae. What that means is that the king, the parents, in England was the father of all of his subjects and ruled over them in ways that a father might rule over his children. And when one of his subjects, particularly if that subject had money or land, became what they referred to as insane. Now, that's not what we call people these days, but often the court would intercede for the dual purpose of protecting the public from the insane one, protecting the insane one from the public, and also for the very convenient issue that the king would take his land when he declared him insane. These proceedings took place in what was known as a chancery court, generally run by the church, as an alternative to the black law, the standard law of civil courts in England. These cases were heard in a courtroom that had the ceiling painted with stars on it, and that's where it got the name the Star Chamber. Those star chambers were infamous in handing down decisions that were rigged and corrupt. And so we have the beginnings of guardianship in England. It comes over to this country in our legal system. It becomes very important in the history of the United States, especially when it comes to oppressing minorities. The FBI itself was formed in reaction to New York Guardians traveling and being sent to Oklahoma to steal the money and the oil that was recently discovered under the ground of the Osage Indian tribes. These guardians came from New York, went to Oklahoma, and wind up killing just about everybody in the Osage Indian tribe and taking what were the single richest individuals per capita in the United States and decimating the entire tribe while they ran off with all the money and oil rights. The guardianship probate courts were active in the slave trade during the time of slavery. When an owner died, when a plantation owner died, it was the probate court that decided where the slaves were going to be sold to or inherited by. And in another very unfortunate situation, probate guardianship was used extensively by proponents of, um, of blood purity. This was led by, unfortunately, Margaret Sanger, the inventor, really, of Planned Parenthood. And to cleanse the American bloodline, there were a number of states, Ohio, interestingly, Indiana, being one of the most active in sterilizing people by taking away their rights and guardianship so they couldn't reproduce. This has been going on for a long time, and in those days, the probate court was an isolated, factional court, not related to the civil or criminal courts. That changed in 1929 when all of the courts in America were conjoined and under one roof. But today, the courts of equity, of which probate is one, divorce and family are the other two, bankruptcy used to be one, but that's now in the federal courts. These state-run courts of equity determine the lives of the young, the middle, and the old people in our country. The lives of the young are controlled in divorce court and family court, as are the lives of working men and women in divorce court. And generally, the disabled and the elderly are dealt with in probate court, probate guardianship court, which is a equity type court. So that's how this all got started. It all started 400 or 500 years ago and has been refined hundreds and hundreds of times to the point where it's a well-oiled machine that does its job very, very efficiently. What that job is, though, is an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Sugar. And if you can, and I know that you're well versed in this, but what are the different types of guardianships? And how does each type, is one better than the other, or how do they work?
So let's understand first that the issues surrounding equity type courts date back to the founding of the country and the difference between states' rights and federalism. Any issue having to do with inheritance and guardianship is one of those issues. The federal government can't get involved. That's a really important thing to understand, because the normal safeguards provided by the federal government in civil and criminal cases simply don't apply in state-based probate guardianship courts. These courts are run by the state Supreme Court, and each state is a little bit different from another state, but they all run on a very similar premise, and that is, in probate court, there is an administrative hearing officer we refer to as a judge. Typically, those judges are elected, although they can be appointed. They are political in that they run as either Democrats or Republicans generally. And once they're elected, they basically can stay on the bench for as long as they want. Frequently, when they run for more than one term, they're unopposed, because electing judges is at the very, very bottom of the ballot, and nobody even knows who these people are, although they are very important in our legal system and can make enormous issues for families that wind up in the guardianship rabbit hole. And the triumvirate of individuals that function in a guardianship through the court include the judges, the guardians, and a bunch of lawyers. Now, let's describe what a judge is. I just told you they're elected and they are essentially hearing officers, but they have vast powers. They're called equitable powers that can do all kinds of things without a jury. The thing about probate court is there are no juries, no particular rules of evidence, and no rules of procedure. It's basically one person in a fiefdom who's the king of the whole area, and whatever that judge says is what will happen. The lawyers, and I'll talk about the case in Florida. In Florida, every time there's a guardianship, a lawyer must be represented, a guardian must be represented by an attorney. Now, who pays for that attorney? Not the guardian. It's the person who's been put in guardianship, and we'll get back to that and how crazy that is. And then, of course, there's the guardian, and people ask me, well, what does it take to be a guardian? And my answer is, well, you have to finish high school. You can do a GED. You have to have never committed a felony or been convicted of a felony. And you have to take a Mickey Mouse course and pay a few dollars, and boom, you're a guardian. And the instructors in the guardianship classes say, good, go out now and find some wards. A ward is a person who requires a guardian, according to the court, and a guardian owns, let me say that again, a guardian owns their ward, literally, as a piece of property. Once the court issues what's called letters of guardianship, you no longer exist in the law if you're the ward, and you are owned by a guardian who can do practically anything they want with you or to you as long as the judge signs off on an order. That's an enormous amount of power for people who are not particularly well educated necessarily, or trained, or familiar with complex financial issues. And yet the court, these judges, appoint them to multi-million-dollar estates and expect everything to be just hunky-dory. Well, while majority of guardianships are okay, I'm not criticizing them. There are several types. The first type is a public guardianship, which means that the individual is poor and doesn't have any money to fight over. Those usually work out pretty well, and they do what they're supposed to do because there's nothing to litigate over. The second type is a family guardianship. And a family guardianship is the most frequent type of guardianship, where a family member takes on the responsibility with no pay. They don't get paid a cent to do everything a professional guardian would do for them, including their medical care, their finances, their housing, their doctor appointments, their grocery shopping, their entertainment, all taken on by a volunteer in the family, who are heroes as far as I'm concerned. And then the third type of guardianship is the professional guardian, who becomes a professional. You would think, "Oh, well, I'm a professional guardian. That means I have to take extra classes and go to school and get certificates and get a license." No, none of that stuff. All you need to be declared a professional guardian in the state of Florida is to have or had 3 guardianships. That's it. You're a professional. And of course, as a professional guardianship, you're expected to handle the most difficult and complex cases, and they are. You're expected to respect the ward and do what's in the best interests of the ward. You are expected to protect their assets. You are expected to deal with their family in a respectful fashion. And most of the time they do. My big complaints don't have anything to do with public guardianships or even family guardianships, although they have their own issues. My concern over the years, and I've been at this now 12 years, is with abuse at the hands of professional guardians who have the authority to do anything they want to do with you as long as they convince the judge to sign a piece of paper allowing them to do it. And that's where the trouble comes in.
And are there certain groups of people that are targets, and why?
Excuse me. The target of, excuse me, that's my post-COVID cough. That was a lot of fun. The targets that are identified come from a variety of sources, but universally in professional guardianships which turn abusive, the one common factor is money, because professional guardianship is all about money. It isn't about how do you best protect someone, how do you keep them well, how do you keep a roof over their head? No, it's about billing and money. So if you're in a family that has a lot of dysfunction and someone's not happy with their share of their projected inheritance, if you're a disgruntled former wife or a disgruntled former business partner and you want to do something nasty against a potential ward, all you need to do is hire a lawyer to go in front of the judge and say the magic words. And those magic words are, "Your Honor, there's someone in your jurisdiction who is maybe abused, neglected, and exploited, and the court must act." Those are the magic words. And within a very, very short time, the judge has the authority to issue what's called an emergency temporary guardianship, excuse me, which is neither an emergency nor temporary, which almost universally leads to a lifelong guardianship. It's kind of shoot first and ask questions later. Once the ETG is in place, then the process of sending some court-appointed examiners to verify the incapacity takes place, and it rolls on and on from there. So the targeted people are the people who are in possession of assets, usually more than $500,000.
Okay. And in what ways these private guardians, in what ways do they abuse the wards and their assets? How do they go about doing that?
How do you abuse me? Let me count the ways. First of all, the very first thing a professional or any other guardian does once appointed is to marshal the assets of the potential ward. That means take everything, change accounts, take every dime, every asset, every stock, every real estate, every piece of clothing, every television set, every iPhone, and now it all belongs to the guardian. If you think that's abuse, I would agree with you. Secondly, that guardian is supposed to make an inventory of everything, but it's done unsupervised and unwitnessed. So if you want to start out by abusing the ward, just lie about the inventory. And boy, we've seen that a lot of times. Secondly, the whole trick in professional guardianship is billing. And when the person's bank account begins to run dry, and there are unpaid legal bills for the guardian's lawyer and unpaid guardian bills, what happens next is that there is a sham sale of the guardian's home, which is, of course, their biggest asset normally. And I describe it much more clearly in the book because it's a little complicated, but these straw man sales wind up paying the guardian and their lawyer and leaving the ward with no money at all, and winding up with the ward on public assistance, which you and I pay for, which wasn't necessary if it weren't for all these legal and professional fees. So those are ways that ward is abused. The ward is abused by being over medicated. When the home is sold and they're stuffed into a senior placement area, a nursing home or something like that, to keep them quiet, keep them from crying, because they're still aware of what's happening to them. They're over medicated like crazy with tranquilizers, sleeping pills, atypical antipsychotics, narcotics. It's really one of the saddest things you'll ever see. When you walk into one of these facilities, you'll see people tied up in jerry chairs, drooling from the mouth. And it's all because they're given drugs that are called handler drugs to keep them quiet. What other ways can you be abused? Well, your family is going to be abused if they try to object to the guardianship. They'll be abused by endless hearings and legal staged litigation. It is an open invitation to a person who is less than completely honest and less than helpful to dip into or even completely take other person's assets and money with total disregard for the unfortunate ward, who almost always winds up in a body bag at the end of these guardianships.
Have you, and I know you may be familiar with this, there was a movie that came out,
Sure,
I Care a Lot, and it
sure.
it actually, it kind of Hollywood version of what happens in guardianships, but is there any truth to what happened in that movie as far as guardianships are concerned?
So what I can tell you from what I've understood is that the director of that movie wrote the script based on websites, including mine, from descriptions of what he had heard about abusive guardianships in the United States. And if you remember, Rosamund Pike, when she accepted the Academy Award for I Care a Lot, said, "I want to thank the corrupt American judicial system for this award." The first half of I Care a Lot was a 100% spot on description of what happens in these guardianships. Although the details change here and there, the second half of the movie was just Hollywood nonsense. But the first half was legit and real and based on real facts that the producer learned from reading websites like ours.
Now, does that happen? And I wanted to ask you this by being a physician, that physician that actually gave that information to that private guardian, does that happen?
Yes, in a short answer, the collusion between all of the what we refer to as the court insiders. Um, Remember, this isn't about helping people. This is about making as much money as you possibly can. There are relationships between guardians and facilities. In fact, it's well known that many guardians have contracts with hospitals that are technically illegal to get patients who are not paying their bills or who are on public aid or have been in the hospital for a long time. Hospitals will employ someone to get those patients out of their hospital, whether they want to leave or not, by making them into wards, by declaring them incapacitated, and transferring them out of the hospital to another facility, a step down facility with which the guardian also has a relationship and often gets paid. So the guardian is making money to move the patient out and move the patient in. And then to complete the circle, when the patient gets sick again in the facility, they go back to the hospital for a Medicare stay of 5 or 6 days, and they wind up in this circle of being admitted and discharged. It's all about money. It's only about money.
Now, are there, and I know you mentioned that the system is, it works for some. There are, this percentage of guardians that do abuse the system. Um, but are there alternatives to guardianships, and why are those not used?
Um, my mama told me something when I was very, very young. She said, Sam, if something happens that you simply don't understand, it makes no sense to you, follow the money, then you'll understand. There are theoretically alternatives to guardianship, such as supported decision making, which I've talked about at length in my book and on our website. The website is www.aapg.net, and the book is Guardianships in the Elderly, the Perfect Crime, and it's available at Amazon. But supported decision making has had a rough row. A lot of courts refuse to do it, and why should they? The courts make a fortune off of this. The lawyers make a fortune off of guardianship. The guardians are in business because of guardianship. And the people downstream make a lot of money in guardianship because once you take away someone's right, they have no protections. And that's why you'll see guardians having relationships with used car dealers, with real estate agents, with resale and antique stores to get rid of all the stuff that they've taken, and they sell it for pennies on the dollar just to make a quick buck, so that the stuff that might be critically important to an elderly person, like their wedding picture, just gets thrown out in the garbage, but their diamond wedding ring gets sold and then resold and resold like their house. Um, it's a sad situation, but as long as a judge puts his signature on an order authorizing a guardian to do anything, you can't do anything about it. The judge can't be sued or questioned, and there's no supervision. The judges have no supervision at all. This is their fiefdom, and that's that. The guardians and the lawyers get some degree of judicial immunity by the judge. And they don't even have the guardians are not licensed. They don't need to have license. They just get certificates. And it's not a good system. It's a very difficult system. When you walk into one of these courts, you're walking into a completely different universe. They don't speak English. They speak some other weird words, mostly in Latin that nobody understands, including the lawyers. Um, the deals were all struck in ex parte private meetings. And the name of the game is to keep the litigation going, because that's where the money is. So some of these cases go on for decades until all the money's gone. It's a sad, sad situation. And at the moment, it is what 99% of the judges in these state courts will resort to, because their goal, whether you believe that they make any under the table money or not, I'm not going to say. I don't have evidence of it, but I do know the judges are overworked. Our litigation system has gone just off the charts, and they need to get cases off their docket. So it's not unusual for a guardianship hearing to be done in 15 minutes or even less. So it is, again, it's a broken system, and how it gets fixed is an open question.
I do have to ask the question, because I've been told as well. I grew up, my parents telling me to also follow the money. Um, but in guardianships, if you follow the money, where's the end of the trail?
Oh boy, the end of the trail. Let me give you an answer that involves a case that's currently under indictment. There was a guardian in the state of Florida who at one time had over 400 guardianships at any given time. That's insane. No one guardian can even remotely take care of 400 wards. I mean, that's just outrageous. But she did, and it was the judges that gave her those guardianships that let that happen. When she was eventually indicted, and that was 3 years ago, she's still waiting to go on trial. A private investigator who is a friend of mine and a member of our organization, whose name is Angela Woodhull, investigated this particular guardian and as many of her guardianships as she could find. Now, that's a problem because nobody even knows how many guardianships there are. And everything about guardianships is a deep, deep, dark secret. States don't keep numbers. You can't research them, but Angela did. And just from the cases that she was able to research, and this is 8 years ago, she determined that this one guardian took or disposed of or hid over $30 million. When she was indicted, all of the law enforcement capability of the state of Florida was directed at finding that money. It's now 3 years later, they haven't found a dime. Why is that? When you get really good at something, you can do amazing things, and it isn't that hard to hide lots and lots of money in the world today. And this woman is still awaiting trial. Her lawyers have been, and I imagine she can afford the best lawyers on earth, have been postponing and postponing and postponing, and who knows if she'll ever really go to trial.
Well, one of the most popular guardianships or conservatorships recently, of course, is Britney Spears. And she recently got out of her, well, sort of got out of her conservatorship. But is there truly a way to get out of guardianship?
No, I'm done. No. Look, I am very familiar with João Fernandes and the other people who worked so hard to get this international megastar partially out of what they call in California a conservatorship. Britney Spears still doesn't have her money, and she may never get her money. She does have her freedom, though, and she was free to be with her fiance and is now expecting a baby, and I'm very happy for her. But look what it took to get that megastar who is known in every corner of the world and who was incredibly disabused by her father. Nobody even understands how much money was stolen from Britney Spears. She only had a few $1 million when she was released. I think it was three. She was worth enormous amounts of money. Where did it go? Nobody seems to figure it out. I wonder why. It took an army of people in the Free Britney movement to get her out. As another example, Peter Max, whom you may or may not know, is a world famous pop artist, very famous in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, who is in a guardianship and who wants out. His daughter, Libra, has been working with us and others to try to get him out. And Libra hired Britney Spears' attorney, Matt Rosengart, to go to New York and try to get her father out. Well, in California, that lawyer might have a lot of sway. He was able to accomplish absolutely nothing in New York. And the result of all of this is the Guardian is suing Libra for defamation. It is a very sick and twisted system. And while I have been involved in a handful of cases where we were able to rescue a ward. Even when they're rescued, when they're released from their guardianship, the money doesn't come back to them. The money that was taken is never restitutionalized. And the scars that they suffer are permanent. Many times, and I shouldn't say many, but in the cases that I've been involved in, while the guardianship is over, there's no place for them to live. They've lost everything. There's no real likelihood of them ever getting it back, and their lives are ruined. So even getting out of a guardianship is not a good answer. The only answer is never to get into one.
So these the private guardianships in the cases that you're talking about with people with assets, once the guardian steps in and they abuse their ward by by taking their money, their assets, everything they have, and they're left destitute, they does that guardianship change over to a public one?
Not necessarily. But that's a very good question because it does do that from time to time. There was an example of a public ward who won the lottery. Now, that's great. They're still incapacitated, but now they're worth a couple of $1 million. Well, the public guardian immediately changed his guardianship to a private one. Why? Because now you can bill their assets to go against. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's because there's a change in the status of the poor, unfortunate ward who suddenly has assets that are going to be taken by the guardian one way or the other.
Gotcha. And I know I heard you mention, I know recently there were some Senate hearings in which, they've said that they were going to establish these different organizations to kind of oversee guardians. Now, is that true? How much do they really guard the guardians? How much accountability is there really in situations of abuse of guardians? Who guards the guardians, I guess is the question.
That's a complicated answer, and I'll try to answer it succinctly. No matter what agency or organization is created to receive complaints, and in Florida, I helped create the Office of Public and Professional Guardianship, which was supposed to do just exactly that, and has been a massive failure in my mind. There are so many government agencies involved in guardianships, including the Department of Elderly Affairs, the OPPG, the Adult Protective Services, Children and Family Protective Services, and the courts and the Supreme Court, and everybody's got their little hand in the pie. But the fact is, no matter who it is that's a guardian that's being investigated, no matter what they've done or haven't done, no matter what you say or don't say, ultimately, unless the guardian has committed an egregious criminal offense, that's a whole different story, and that's when law enforcement gets involved. But unless the guardian has been incredibly stupid or incredibly criminal, there's only one person on planet Earth that can do anything about a guardianship. You know who that is? That's the judge that appointed them in the first place. Judges do not like to be wrong. They do not. And we've seen so many times when a judge is confronted with evidence of wrongdoing by the guardian they appointed, where they just simply shrug it off because it's easier to ignore it than to fix it. That's the sad truth.
Yeah, no, I know my thought was in looking at guardianships when we talked about following the money, and I'm going back to that only because you mentioned something just a minute ago about the other agencies that get involved, just connection with, the kind of going up the chain of command to getting into the Senate. My thought initially, and this still is, obviously, if they won't fix the problem, that they're part of it, um, that there potentially is some benefit to them as well for
Of course
participate.
there is. Of course there is. I mean, I told you this is all about money.
Yeah.
It's only about money. So what are we talking about here? Well, the courts in Florida are a multi-billion-dollar business. That's just in Florida. All of these cases involve legal fees and court fees and charges. The courts make money on guardianship. The courts make money in a lot of different ways, and not just the courts, it's the bar, actually. You may have heard of IOLTA accounts. It's called interest only lawyers trust accounts. When there is a guardianship involving lots of money, whether it's a guardianship or a civil case or a criminal case, that money typically gets deposited into an IOLTA account by the lawyer. Now, I did some investigating on this. In the state of Florida, there is a boatload of money in those IOLTA accounts. Do you know who gets the interest from that money? You can guess. It's the bar. The bar makes millions of dollars, which is why the bar is so concerned with low interest rates, because their income has been slashed because of low interest rates. I think they're going to go up now, but the bar makes a lot of money from these cases. And of course, the lawyers themselves do too. Just in what they bill in terms of their fees, because legal fees, depending on how big shot the lawyer is, can be up to $1,000 an hour. And these cases that go on and on and on and on, if you just have, for example, a discovery deposition, it's not unusual to have half a dozen lawyers there. It's not unusual for it to go on for 2 days. So that's 16 hours for, say, 4 to 5 lawyers at between $500 and $1,000 an hour, just for a stupid deposition. And lawyers get paid for just about thinking about a case, and so do guardians. Guardians can make a beautiful living simply by opening the mail of their wards. In Florida, private guardians can charge $85 an hour, and it takes half an hour to open somebody's mail, right? Sure it does. And you open mail 6 days a week. Do the math. See how much money a guardian makes by just opening one ward's mail 6 days a week every year. If you've got 2 or 3 wards, which you should if you're a professional guardian, that's all you need to do is open their mail. But of course, that is not all they do. They make phone calls, they make shopping trips, they talk to other people. It is a very lucrative profession that has almost no entry requirements of education. In fact, when I started out in this, I investigated the professions, the so-called professions of the leading professional guardians. And at that time, there was a woman who is the president of some guardianship organization. And her occupation was professional dog walker. I thought that was interesting.
Wow. Well, it takes a professional to walk the dog properly. So does it?
Yeah.
That
Dogs
is
got to be
that's
walked.
right, exactly. That's scary, to say the least. But I want to end with actually one or two last questions, but with everything that you've just said, how is it possible? How do we fix it?
I don't know how it gets fixed. I should, if anyone does, but I don't, because power and greed are exceptionally strong vices. And the way the system has evolved in the last 90 or so years, it's ironclad and bulletproof. I think, as I mentioned at the outset, what's most important for me right now is to get the message out of the risk that we all face, especially those of us with elderly parents who might have some assets. Um, the trick is to recognize the risk and try to do everything you can to never be involved in a guardianship in the first place, because the best guardianship is the one that never happens. Everybody, even among the court insiders, will tell you, God, I hope I never get into a guardianship and I'll fight like hell to get out of it. Unfortunately, these things come at you out of the blue. You never know they're coming. You're not prepared. And while you find out about it on a Monday and immediately start looking for lawyers, and that can take a long time too, the court insiders have been planning this for weeks and months. They've got everything laid out. They know exactly what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. And all you are then is the loving family member of a potential ward who has become a patsy, someone who believes in justice, believes they can win, and is easily duped by these professionals, the patsy. And you don't want to be a patsy. It's a terrible feeling. There's a whole lot of nuance to the rest of this story that I try to lay out in the book. It's called Guardianships in the Elderly, The Perfect Crime. It's available on Amazon. But most importantly, I want people to know that they never should fall into this rabbit hole because you can't get out. You cannot get out. At the end of the day, what you have is a dead ward, an exhausted and bankrupted family, and a family that's broken forever for generations. That's just not what this was supposed to do, which is why I call this system so broken. And until we can figure out to get the incentive of money out of this game, out of this system, out of this racket, out of the judiciary and out of the bar which runs the country, I'm not sure there is an answer. And that means that even if you've been very successful, um, everything you have could vanish in a blink of an eye. And that's the message I want to send out to everyone who hears this. Be careful with your family relations. Fix them if you can, so that nobody ever resorts to hiring a lawyer to fix family problems, because that's universally a disaster. Make sure that your parents' wishes or your loved ones' wishes are well known. Make sure they have advanced directives, even though they typically are ignored in probate court. That's another full discussion. Make sure that everybody knows what your loved ones' wishes are and who they want to appoint to take care of them when they're too old to take care of themselves. And those are the big things. Now, do they universally work? No. Mm-mm. If somebody's out to get you, if somebody wants their inheritance before your loved one dies, there will be a guardianship. There will. And once they start, it's essentially impossible to stop them. But it's a real problem. And I hope that the next generation of advocates, which I've helped create, helped train, are more aggressive and smarter than this generation of us who have been hitting our heads against the stone wall for a decade. And somebody comes up with a better idea, maybe something like supported decision making or something even better. But until we get the financial incentives out of the probate, family, and divorce courts, I think there's tremendous danger for every American.
Thank you, Dr. Sugar. I had one final question, and it looks like somebody in the chat also had that very same question, but you kind of answered it just now. They did ask the question, how can you prevent being placed under guardianship for ourselves and our loved ones? Is there any way to
So,
make sure that you're not
no,
declared incapacitated?
the answer is no, but there are steps that you can take. If you're lucky enough to know that a sham guardianship or a corrupt guardianship is about to be underway, before it starts, once it starts, there's nothing you can do. But before it starts, you can hightail it out of there. You can legally move, and I talk about this in the book, to a different jurisdiction where different judges are, but it's an extremely risky procedure. It's extremely difficult to do, and most families can't do it because you have to live on cash for 3 months because all your accounts will have to be switched. The answer is it's conceivable, but highly unlikely.
So there is really no way, because I know when I was going through this with my husband, someone mentioned somewhere along the line after guardianship had already been taken from me, about a durable power of attorney. And even that's not even 100% guaranteed that, things are going to go that way. So you're saying there's no
No. And
guarantee.
let's talk about durable power of attorney, which is one of the documents in advance directives. Advanced directives usually consist of a will, a durable power of attorney, and a healthcare power of attorney, which tells anybody who will listen what you want to happen when you can't make your own decisions about money or health. Well, that sounds really good. And Americans spend billions of dollars every year with lawyers to produce those documents. And you would think That's all you need. After all, Your Honor, here are the papers. It says that my son is going to be my healthcare power attorney, and my daughter is going to be my durable power attorney. What else do you need? And that works if the court is ever presented with those documents. But I will tell you, sometimes they ignore them completely, pretend they don't exist. And sometimes they are even more clever than that, saying, well, the judge says, I see this document, but it was written years ago, and who even knows whether this person was already incapacitated when they wrote it? So, no, I'm not going to listen to that. And I'm appointing my friend, the professional guardian. That's how corrupt this gets.
Wow, it's scary, Dr. Sugar.
I care a lot was right on the money, that this is how the reality of the situation plays itself out. It is terrifying. It is debilitating, and it has ripples for generations, which is why I've made it my life's purpose to talk about this. Now, as I said at the beginning, I could talk about this for 10 hours and still have more information to give. But for people who are interested, get educated, look at our website, read the book, read the other books that are available, talk to people who have been involved in this. And then if you're moved, get active, become an advocate. Understand that we need to help each other in this country, because for some terrible reason, the country and the artifices that have been set up for us to get help from the government have been perverted into hurting us. And that's tragic.
Well, we are going to continue to talk about this, Dr. Sugar. I've not stopped since 2020, and I won't stop talking about it. People do need to be made more aware that it does happen, and it can happen to anybody.
That's right.
So I'm definitely with you on that one. I won't stop talking about it. The next couple of weeks, we'll also have additional podcasts, and we're going to talk about different parts of the guardianship process as we move forward this month. But does anyone have any questions if you do, please put them in the chat for Dr. Sugar. He can answer your questions for you today. And while we're waiting for any questions, Dr. Sugar, can you let any and everyone know how they can get in contact with you if they have questions, if they need assistance? What's a good way to get in contact with you?
Well, I think the easiest thing is to go on our website, where our contact information is posted. The best way to get a hold of me is email, and it's right on the website at www.aapg.net. That's P as in Peter, G as in Gregory. And in my book, there is a glossary at the end of dozens of organizations that are allegedly there to help people in this situation. And I strongly suggest that people who are concerned about this learn about those organizations, some NGOs, some government organizations as well.
Well, there are no questions in the chat, but there's a comment, Dr. Sugar, and I don't know if you can see that. It says, no, this has been great and very informational. And actually, there is one question. Lori asked the question, are all states pretty much the same?
With significant differences. For example, most of the country calls guardianship by that name. California doesn't. They call it conservatorship. And there are trivial little differences, but it's basically the same in every state, with a twist here and a twist there. And there are more twists coming, because as the information and data about the abuses that are being committed in guardianship become publicly known, there are changes to the legislation which are massive. Even I can't keep up with them in every state. But the bottom line is, it's trying to plug a hole in a balloon that's leaking. As soon as you plug one area, another one will pop up. And until there's a systemic overhaul of the entire system, state by state, and that's the problem. The feds can't do this. They won't do it. They're not allowed to. So you're talking about an enormous effort in 50 different states to overturn the status quo, which has been so incredibly lucrative to the court insiders. I'm not hopeful, but I am hopeful that people can learn and be careful and watch for the warning signs, which I talk about in the book as well, and try everything they can think of never to wind up down this rabbit hole.
All right. Well, I don't see, actually, is there another question here? Lori asks, are there any questions we as voters can ask candidates?
Oh, of course, but the question is which candidates? We do not vote to elect members of the bar. They're not elected officials. We do vote to appoint Supreme Court justices, but once they're in, they're there forever. I'm talking about state Supreme Courts. And we do vote for probate court judges. We do. The trouble is, you just go try and find out what a probate court judge is running on, and you won't be able to. These are end of the ballot choices. And the only way that a voter can actually determine who is the good judge to vote for is by word of mouth. There are websites like the Robing Room, ROBINGROOM, which talk about judges and grade them and have comments about them. But unfortunately, it is almost impossible to find out anything about any aspect of a guardianship court. You just can't. So getting in contact with people like me who might be familiar with at least the judges in their own state, and there are other advocates all over the country who are doing the same thing, is one way. But that's one of the problems. Everything about guardianship is a big, big, dark, deep secret. And that needs to change.
All right, I think that's the last question, Dr. Sugar. I did put Dr. Sugar's information in the chat section. It's his book, which is Guardianships and the Elderly: The Perfect Crime, and also that web address again for his organization, that is AAAPG.net. And I want to thank you so much, Dr. Sugar. I know when I reached out to you to participate, you so willingly and quickly said yes, that you would do it. I appreciate that. And our guests appreciate it as well. Thank you so much. And we'll continue to always also spread the word. Thank you so much for your advocacy and your time today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
All right. All right, so we're going to end this podcast. And just to let you know, so next week, next Wednesday, we'll also have another podcast. We're going to talk about the subject of guardianship abuse as well, and just kind of looking at a different aspect of it. Dr. Sugar mentioned the public guardianship. So we're going to go more into detail about the public guardianship process. But we thank you all. Everyone have a good night, and thank you for coming.